Namaste and welcome to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu. We've been, over the last several sessions, going in depth in chapter 22 of Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine with the intention to study the nature of the transition of the soul from one life to the next. What is the mechanism of separation? What is the rationale of the passage in other worlds? And both rationale and mechanism of preparation for next life and reincarnation. As you can see, Sri Aurobindo goes in depth at the level of core principles. He takes extra effort to reintegrate with existing traditions of various religions, philosophies, belief systems, and shows how, even though they may be almost infantile sometimes in their conception of things, that conception actually might have a grain of truth in a very specific, limited context. The reason he takes care to do that is as if to show that even behind some of these infantile conceptions, there used to be perhaps a deeper past knowledge, which has been reduced, distorted in time, and what remains today is this distorted perception. So, for example, when he takes up the concepts of hells and heavens, and then he shows you how actually one can have an equivalent experience, although they are not the way those traditions describe them to be. And so we get such a comprehensive view in which we can appreciate all variations, all possibilities of what is possible, as well as what commonly occurs, and more importantly, why. The why empowers us in two ways. First, that we realize with suitable preparation, we can take advantage of that principle, that working, that why, to have an added benefit, both in the nature of the transition, in the freedom we have in the subtle worlds, as well as the choices we have in our reincarnation. So we can as if tune ourselves for that. And the second reason, appreciate the way the universe is structured and works in the larger scheme of things, which reflects then in ourselves and the way we are structured as a microcosm. In what we have read so far, you see this idea again and again. What you do in the physical life while incarnated in the body has massive consequences in what happens after you leave the body. Equally, the decisions made in that internatal state between births actually formulate the broad direction and have massive consequences in the next incarnation and what happens then. This dual connection is so important to understand, but of this relationship, Sri Aurobindo says, it is always the inner which imprints into the outer. Yes, the outer has an influence on the inner, but the inner, taking in all the influences of the learning from the outer experiences of life, absorbing them in some sense, is the decider of which direction to go, what to keep, what to discard, as well as when to bring forward new and other facets of prior experience or inherent potential of a deeper soul or spiritual side, to draw upon those and infuse them into the front. This dynamic relationship of the outer and the inner, and the freedom of the inner always to assert itself, becomes more and more important as we learn to center ourselves more and more in the inner life, in the inner center, in the approaching the true soul, or at least its influence. You will find me using these multiple terms, approaching, coming under influence, etc., because I'm wary of speaking a vocabulary that is too rigidly defined as separating one from the other. That is psychic realization versus psychic unrealization. To me, those words are troubling because they are not really defined in a way that is useful. To come under influence of the psychic itself can have degrees. And there could be parts, mind, vital, even the physical, could come to different degrees. There could be influences which are specific to certain states or specific to certain activities. When, for example, the person is composing music and is aligned at that moment only to the psychic presence or the higher intuition, and then after that he is a very ordinary person. And there is nothing which is trenchant cutting that says, so and so person has therefore got this. No. There is always this continuum. And there is always a potential to deepen, to widen, to integrate further and more. Even when a person has constant contact with the psychic presence, I would be wary of speaking of psychic realization. The realization word I would receive for when the entire center of personality is now identified with the psychic being, or rather the psychic being has come forward and taken its place as the center of the personality in an irrevocable way. Then we would say such a person has psychic realization. Even then, there would be parts, there would be tendencies, there would be activities in which the psychic influence might not be sufficiently integrated, or there would be parts in the nature which would rebel against that influence, and perhaps the person would be conscious but unable to, perhaps. So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities, and so rather than fixating on such words, the practical guideline that we may all keep for our purpose is to be conscious of the psychic influence and to let that influence grow more and more in our life, more and more frequently, more and more constantly, in more and more activities, and in more and more parts of our consciousness. And so, the more we come in alignment with the psychic influence, the more that influence has greater say in our life, the greater the freedom of the soul exercised, the greater the possibilities of the inner choice and the inner potential being brought forward to be infused into daily life. So in this relationship between our outer nature and the inner psychic presence and its potential, since everything is held there as potential, the opening to this paves the way for that potential to come forward more and more smoothly, fully, rapidly, and so on. We have looked already at, since it's a gap of 4 weeks, to quickly summarize, we have looked at how Sri Aurobindo explains what happens in the immediate transition after leaving the body. Key ideas where we are still in our subtle physical body, we still have a vital and a mental body and a psychic being. In the subtle physical itself, there is a vital range and a mental range. And so one can literally go through, just in the subtle physical grade, through multiple stages of the subtle physical's physical domain, almost material to the physical world, and then the vital and the mental. And each of these you would be in a kind of a dreamlike creative state in which your prior obsessions, fixations, ideas, habits, preconceptions strongly molded in you would tend to create a perception of reality, which, although your own creation, still reflects certain essential truths, but what in your own little reality bubble, so to say. And to these, Sri Aurobindo gives the term annexes to the real worlds. Going through those, even one would come in through annexes into the vital world. You can be in an annex to the vital world in your little bubble. So having passed through the subtle physical, one would enter into the vital worlds, again through the annex, dissolving the bubble. And who dissolves the bubble, remember? He said the pressure of the soul. If that pressure were not there, you would tend to remain bound in your fixed beliefs and value systems and fantasies or dream state. Literally, you're dreaming a reality which is your own conception, and it can be very finely detailed and rich and precise, but it will just be a dream. It's always the soul pressure which will as if push into the surface consciousness in the subtle body. Still there is a surface consciousness. That, oh, something is wrong. This is not quite it. It feels like there is something else which I'm not recognizing. Why that something else is the influence of the psychic pushing forward. Wake up. Dissolving and leaving out, breaking apart, so to say, elements which are no more useful. So again, you realize how important it is for that influence to be present in your physical life. So even in the transition, that element can be strongly present in making a smooth transition through. So having gone through the annex stage, you then enter the vital worlds, where something very important happens. Strong tendencies, you can of course fulfill through various experiences, and you can purge those tendencies which have no more value today, or no more value for the soul for its next line of experience. That next line of experience was decided at the moment of leaving the body, when the soul looked back at the past journey of life. In a single moment, the entire scene of every single event and every single moment of life and its learning experience, and in that flash, a decision made. And in that decision, a broad direction set for what it needs next. And that set decision, direction, determines now what will be discarded in the purgatory passage, where you purge out certain tendencies so that the built-up content of energy of those drives are exhausted, and that tendency itself can then be withdrawn and other tendencies brought forward. Through such a passage, purging what is needed, dissolving what is not needed, the soul, depending on the degree of maturity and individualization of all these levels, would then retain something of the individualized part of the vital or the mental, if it is reasonably evolved and individualized. If not, it will all be dissolved. But still the soul would then, having passed through the mental stage, to the extent it has been developed, and if it's not well developed, it would be in a sleep-like state, as the soul finally withdraws into the psychic. Indrawing, assimilating the influences of the life, first. Second, discarding what is no more needed. Third, bringing forward what is required for the next. And in this way, there is a whole movement, almost like a metamorphosis. The whole personality is reshaped, recast to what is required to the next. And from there, when that transition is ready, turning to the domain of life, it aligns to the best circumstance that is felt. From its perspective, from the soul consciousness, from the psychic worlds, all the way to the material worlds, what is the best that feels from the soul's consciousness? If it is not mature enough, there are beings who would help to do that. And then it can, as if, so to say, takes a headlong plunge to link to that opportunity. But this is the broad general cycle. In between there are infinite variations. As looking at the principles Sri Aurobindo describes, you could from any point turn back and continue reincarnation without going into this resting stage. And so from the subtle physical you could reincarnate, from the vital you could reincarnate, from the mental you could reincarnate, keeping a large parts of the previous personality substance or discarding large parts, which makes for a huge variety of possibilities. In all this, Sri Aurobindo highlighted the importance of what is done in the physical life for purpose of this whole transition. But the same way, in the turn during the metamorphosis, the new turn given, the new turn taken of the life purpose, becomes then the motive driver for the next incarnation. And in the plunge, taking on the human body, we saw that it can be multiple stages of connection, even before conception, during conception, after conception, during fetal development, during birth, after birth. Any point there could be the connection, or there could be a partial connection built and a progressive infusion of the consciousness joining with the child's consciousness, with all those variations possible. Still, entering into life, one may find circumstances not conducive, opposing sometimes actively, and your intended purpose either hampered or postponed or completely sidelined. Because at the end of the day, we are still operating in circumstances where either life circumstances may not be supportive, or there may be forces opposing, or you yourself in your capacity are unable to actualize what the potential that you have come to execute. And so all these possibilities make for very complex and rich adventure, let's say, from the soul's point of view. We have looked at, in the text that we read last time, in some detail, the letters of Sri Aurobindo, where he discusses some of these things and I read from most of those. But in the portion where we paused in the text from the chapter 22 of Life Divine, he says, the terrestrial gathering up and the development of the materials thus prepared, their working out in the earth life, would be the consequence of this internatal resort. And the new birth would be a field of the resultant activity, a new stadium or spiral curve in the individual evolution of the embodied spirit. This was the point where we had paused. And for those of you who have not seen the previous sessions, please do look, because we've built up a very deep, rich understanding of this whole transition process. But we now come to something extremely important. And this relates to that whole metamorphosis process of where the soul, so to say, withdraws certain facets and brings forward other facets and forms its new personality for incarnation. Of this, Sri Aurobindo says, for when we say that the soul on earth evolves successively, the physical, the vital, the mental, the spiritual being, we do not mean that it creates them and that they had no previous existence. So you have reshaped this, entered into the physical incarnation to bring forward certain potential possibilities. And in the physical incarnation, you go through evolving successively the physical, the vital, the mental, and the spiritual individuality, being. So what's being done? What does that really mean when you're evolving? So he says it doesn't mean that you're creating something out of nothing, or that there is no prior existence to these things. On the contrary, what it does is to manifest these principles of its spiritual entity under the conditions imposed by a world of physical nature. So you've come forward, let's say now, to take on an experience of heroic action. You brought forward all the prior developed elements of the heroic action. So you have as if a certain capacity already prior built up. And then you want to develop them further and take forward a certain potential. You've connected to the physical life, with bringing with you a certain capacity, but now you want to grow more in that capacity. So this which you are bringing as a potential is a capacity at a level which is essential, like a principle, a capacity of consciousness. You are then infusing this on circumstances which are supportive or even opposing. If you're supportive, you have a supportive environment, you're born in a family which is strong in its valor and heroic tendencies. Or, in opposing terms, you might be in a contrary environment You have nothing to assist you. You have no examples around you. You have nothing in the inheritance of the biology or the life energy which you have inherited from your ancestry. You have nothing in your environment to uh, give you an example looking at someone, no stories perhaps to inspire. So either way, you are bringing something and you have physical circumstances, and they can be either conducive or contrary. So you're trying to manifest these principles of this spiritual being that has brought this under the conditions imposed by a world of physical nature. The world has imposed something, saying, this is all I can allow you. This is all I'm going to give you. And you're entering that world and you're trying to bring forward these principles and manifest them. Give them form, give them shape, give them action. This manifestation takes the form of a structure of frontal personality, which is a translation of the inner self into the terms and possibilities of the physical existence. So this is the kind of sentence where it does not make sense unless you have some even intuitive feel or experience of what we are talking about. And this is the kind of sentence which puts off the pure academics. The academic will read a sentence like this and say, yeah, either it makes sense, it's pure abstract theory, or it just doesn't make sense and Sri Aurobindo's English is too difficult. No, it's not that. It's that you're dealing with a domain of reality which is so different from the material that when you try to translate an experience from that inner or higher range into the material terms, you're struggling. And still, Sri Aurobindo does not struggle. He gives you precise vocabulary to convey what it is. But you do not have human words, or you do not have equivalent experience by which to understand those words. But we'll look at it in a different way and it will be very simple and very obvious. Some of this you notice from literature which relates to people having out-of-body experiences. One of the common difficulties we have, and Mother points to that as the case for many of us, we might have an experience but we don't have recollection. Very similar to dreams. People who say, I don't dream. No, you dream. You just don't remember. Why? Okay, we saw there is a gap of consciousness, but more important, there are experiences that can be had in the subtle body, which has capacities far greater of experience and even sense, which when you translate into the physical body have no equivalent. How do you bring a memory into a domain which is unable to have that memory because it has no prior such capacity or experience? A very simple example would be you go into the vital worlds and the colors are so not only rich in variation, but there are colors which don't exist in the physical world. You see those colors. Oh, it's so nice. It's so wonderful. It's so beautiful. What do you name the color? I don't know. I've never seen that in the physical world. I don't have the capacity in the physical body to even imagine such a color. So when you come back and you now join with your physical body, what happens? The body has no connection, no imagination, no capacity for that color, and the color grays out, blanks out, or becomes invisible, unreal. The problem though is you're still carrying a memory, and as you join into the physical body, it fades and you have no words. I saw a color. There was a tree with this color. What does it look like? Was it green? Was it red? No. Was it a blend of green and red? No. It was a totally different color. How do you describe? There's no name. How do you explain to somebody who has not seen that color what the color is? You see, because all of us have a shared world experience in the biology, we can all point to a red and say that is red. And so we have all come to an agreement, we will use this word for this color experience. And for those who are color blind, it's a problem because they see the green and the red, for example, as the same color. Then what happens? You say red, either fellow says, yeah, okay. You say green, he says, it's the same. But when there's a new color, you have no vocabulary. And it's not just a simple case of the sensory experience, it's also state of consciousness, for which you have no equivalent translation. The closest you will find, and this is the most beautiful part of Sri Aurobindo's work, the closest you will find is in Savitri. or in Sri Aurobindo's poetry, mystical poetry, where he is able to convey the experiences with words in a way that as you read, you get pulled into that experience and you say, oh, this is a familiar thing. You don't, of course, get fully there, but it reminds you, you remember something which was long forgotten, and as if the influence of that begins to dawn on you and prepares you that when you have that experience, you say, ah, yes, it's familiar. And that's what you come back and you reread those words, ah, this is what he was describing. So what was earlier trying to dawn on you in a non-receptive incapacity, having had the experience, you come back and you say, this is exactly it. It's so precisely worded. Now it's the words have a living force that pulls back the full intensity of the experience. This power to transmit, and then once you have had the experience, to reactivate it instantly to its full power, is the whole worth, the value of this mystical spiritual poetry. And it is one of the most extraordinary gifts that Sri Aurobindo has left for us, for human beings. So I'm coming to the description here. He says, this manifestation takes the form of a structure of frontal personality, which is a translation of the inner self into the terms and possibilities of the physical existence. What you are within as a psychic being, psychic personality and its potential, is at that level so different as to have no corresponding equivalent in the physical world. But you're going to manifest it, you're going to try to manifest it, at least in the physical world. So what happens? When you try to translate, there's a translation of this inner self into the terms and possibilities of the physical existence. There's a huge reduction, but something closest equivalent, something like that. Almost this will fit together some pieces in a cluster of experiences to approximate what we're trying to express. And in this way, it forms a structure of frontal personality. You see how this works? In the translation, with all the reduction, a structure is created in the frontal personality. And this is the frontal personality in this person, the imprint that the soul has brought and was able to project forward. Do you understand? So when we say that something outside in you, in your temperament is a soul influence or a carryover from a past life, it's this kind of translation. It's not the thing itself. And it will reflect sometimes in familiarities. We have taken many examples over the last few sessions looking at reincarnation. So certain things are, it's so familiar. This whole field of music has a familiarity, but my development in it, my training in it was of a certain kind, and all those tendencies come forward. But when I try to fit them into the vehicle of available instruments, something is not quite. I'm struggling to make it fit. And this is quite different from the physical skill of it. Even with the physical skill, the conception of music I have, which I want to express, I'm unable to find the words or the forms for it, if the soul influence is strong. Otherwise, whatever is the reduced version, I do that, I feel good, I'm happy, and I let my life flow in that direction by the familiarity of that alignment, and that's all. This is often the way in most human beings. The life direction set by the soul is, so to say, driven. That you feel familiarity, you feel happy, you feel comfort, you feel as if it's worthwhile doing this, and that's all that's left of that push and what it wants to express. So, I reread the sentence, you'll see how much sense it makes now. On the contrary, what it does is to manifest these principles of its spiritual entity under the conditions imposed by a world of physical nature. This manifestation takes the form of a structure of frontal personality, which is a translation of the inner self into the terms and possibilities of the physical existence. So physical existence only offers limited terms and possibilities, like limited colors, limited capacities. And this, which comes from the soul, undergoes a kind of a translation and creates a structure of frontal personality. So we look at this child, we say, oh, this child, he has musical talent or ability, or he will be a musician, or his being is of music. This is an interesting observation. Uh, Somebody, if you know the name Rajarshi, who founded a school in Bangalore later, when he was in the ashram before as a student and then as an adult, uh, he was a musician through and through. He would sing, and that was his life. And one day when he met my teacher, MP Pandit, Panditji told him, you have a musical being. And through his life, Rajesh, every time he met me, he would tell me, Panditji told me this, and he would be so happy just to think of that and remember that. And you get a sense then of how close that whole turn of nature was to the soul aspiration for this incarnation. And you see how the thing works. And so his being is turned like this everywhere. It is through music, as if. But of course, you can't get music everywhere. So what happens? That same thing which we are reducing to music in the surface physical terms, which was in a soul quality, which is not just music, but something which is the harmony of souls, joyous flow of song and music and expression. If you had to use human words. I don't have the poetic expression, but I'm sure we'll find lines in Savitri which describe this. So that movement translated into the framework of the box of music, so to say, in physical terms. But also, which I saw interesting in him, was it translated in the same kind of refined enjoyment and complex blend of mix of notes and harmonies in food. He was a master of the appreciation of different kinds of food. And he would go into fine nuances, like a musical creator. He would, once in a while, when I had to go for programs in their school, he would take us out. He would pick a restaurant which was of his standard. He would call the chef and make fine adjustments on the way he wanted that. And when the food would be brought, he would eat like you're tasting music, joy. You see, the key word here, for which there is no English equivalent, is rasa. And the element in him was this rasa aspect and the enjoyment of the rasa aspect. Yes, largely in his being through the music, but it was there in every other part, in every other direction. And I'm giving this as an example because through this you can as if reach behind and feel the nature of the soul's joy and purpose in this incarnation, to have that expression of the rasa or the tasting of the rasa. But the way it was infused was multifaceted, touching so many facets, because physical nature is too reductionist. And that's why we cannot reduce the soul's purpose in just one or two lines, or a few words, or a career form, or even a specific kind of activity by saying, oh, it's just music. It's a reductionist. You are unable to make a complete direct imprint. It has to be translated, and the word Aurobindo uses takes the form of a structure of frontal personality, which is a translation of the inner self into the terms and possibilities of the physical existence. You understand? The sentence is so precisely describing what happens in this translation. So, this is the manifestation. Forms this frontal personality and a structure in it. In fact, he continues, we must accept the ancient idea that man has within him not only the physical soul or Purusha with its appropriate nature, but a vital, a mental, a psychic, a supramental, a supreme spiritual being. So we don't just have within us the physical soul or physical Purusha with its tendencies and appropriate nature. That's what it seems like in the body incarnation. But there's also vital soul, vital Purusha, mental soul or mental Purusha, psychic soul, psychic Purusha, supramental soul, supramental Purusha, or a supreme spiritual being, of which all these are, so to say, aspects or facets, we might say. And this he is referring to when he says the ancient idea, he is referring to the Taittiriya Upanishad. Again, I'm going to make a slight aside, because one sees this tendency in so many new age attempts of spirituality to mix everything up and say, it's all the same. Oh, all the religions are the same. Oh, all the traditions are the same. Not at all. The kind of depth that you find in the most ancient Upanishads or in the Vedas, and with this kind of understanding and with this kind of detailed conception, formulation of the nature of reality and our individual nature, you do not find in any other tradition. And it's all right to say, in this tradition, in this one line of whatever holy book of some tradition, I found a similar idea. A similar idea is not the same idea. It does not go into this kind of depth and completion. I'm going to take a moment here to perhaps go all the way to the beginning of this chapter, where Sri Aurobindo actually has the phrasing from the Taittiriya Upanishad. I think it is here. So there are, in each of the Life Divine chapters, there is a quotation from some of these, and you'll see the theme of the chapter and the content of the chapter aligns to those quotations. So here Taittiriya 3.10.5 as a reference. The translation from Sri Aurobindo is, he passes in his departure from this world to the physical self. He passes to the self of life. He passes to the self of mind. He passes to the self of knowledge, the supramental in this case. He passes to the self of bliss, Satchidananda. He moves through these worlds at will. So when you've left the body, you are moving into or supported by the domain of the self of the physical supporting behind. But from this to the self of life, the self of mind, the self of the super mind, and the self of the Satchidananda. So these become, so to say, the five domains or the five bodies which are described in the yoga tradition. But you understand what is taught today is so superficial. The deeper truth is something here. And in these, he moves through these worlds at will. Why? Because there is a self of you, equivalent of these worlds, already present. You can enter the domains of the Satchidananda because there is a self of Satchidananda, self of bliss, which is yours. You can enter the supramental worlds because there is a self of supermind, which is yours. You can enter the domains of the mind because the self of mind, which is yours. Now, obviously, we can't all do it in the full waking consciousness because the waking consciousness of that grade is not organized. Nevertheless, the self of that domain is existing, supporting. And because it is there, you can get to that. It's not as if you're creating something which was non-existent. It was already there as potential. But in bringing it forward and organizing it, you're building the faculties and capacities of engaging in that domain, and then having developed that, you can enter the mental worlds or the higher ranges of the mental worlds or the supramental worlds and so on. But you can do that because there is already the self of mind behind, or the self of supermind, or the self of vital, or the self of the physical. So we're coming to something very profound here, and it's one of those things where you can't talk too much about it until one has an experience of what that really means, but we can come very close to even understanding what that experience could be like by dwelling on it in the way we're doing. And that's why, you see, after a point, Sri Aurobindo does not bother to explain too much. You could just take this much and build around it a whole chapter, perhaps, of how that happens, what happens. And you'll get all the essential processes and the relationship in the lines that follow in what Sri Aurobindo gives. But that's it. The elaboration will be obvious in the experience. So, in fact, we must accept the ancient idea that man has within him not only the physical soul or Purusha with its appropriate nature, that's what we are now with our soul nature, physical nature, and behind it the physical Purusha supporting, but a vital, a mental, a psychic, a supramental, a supreme spiritual being. So we have to accept there is all this. These are the... And either the whole or the greater presence or force of them is concealed in his subliminal, or latent and unformulated in his superconscient parts. So now comes this whole idea. Either the whole of this, of the Purusha, is or a greater presence or force is concealed in his subliminal. So either the whole is there or a greater presence or force is concealed behind. Let's take the example of the mental, vital and physical. In the mental potential, and you see this happening in every child spontaneously around the age of 10, 11, 12. Slowly the mind awakes. After 12, typically a strong tendency of individualizing of the mental being comes forward, and with it all the faculties of intelligence begin to sprout and grow, and the natural instinct of the child is to exercise those faculties as they grow. If you did nothing and just nourished him, he would tend to grow. Challenged him when the growth stops to push further, and you would take him to beyond his instinct limited growth. You push him to his greater potential. But what's happening? Where is it coming from? Where is it sprouting? How does it know what to develop? Which direction to develop? The faculty itself is not developed by you or by anything you teach. The faculty is unwinding, unfolding, flowering out in you spontaneously. Do you understand what that means? It was always there. It was as if folded up like petals and now unfolding, and the faculty was always there. In your exercise of it, you are giving it a more and more organized form, ability, skill, capacity that is growing. But the faculty itself was already present. So let's take a simple faculty of logic. You see the children starting to argue typically at that age. But this is not correct. Why do you do this? This doesn't make sense. Is it logical? And sometimes parents who have not developed the intellect the same way will simply say, oh, you will understand when you grow up. This is how it is. I don't know, but this is what we have been told. Something. And the child tends to reject because it's irrational, illogical, typically with rituals or beliefs. And it's good. Question. Please develop that. But what is he doing at that point? Questioning. And as the faculty grows, he begins to question his own questioning. And then suddenly comes this recognition, hey, I can argue out anything. I can justify anything. The faculty is now coming into its own and meeting its own limitations. If you allowed it to. If at that point, or if at each stage the teacher says, stop asking silly questions, don't ask, behave yourself, don't question, or other means. All this gets shriveled and blocked in its unfolding possibilities. The faculty is still there, undeveloped. What is development? Is its drawing out and organizing in material biology embedded mental consciousness. Where it was held potentially is in the subtle inner layers, subliminal, behind the veil, in the subtle body, we could say. So, for example, you step out of the body, you will find your intelligence is much greater. You embed yourself back into the body and immediately the intelligence dims. You take the person who has a mental, they used to use the word retarded. It's apparently today that's considered not polite, so you have to say mentally challenged. Let's just say it as it is. There's a retardation in the development. And you'll understand why. There's a retardation in the mental development. The person steps out of the physical body. In most cases, that layer will be functional. You re-embed and there's a dulling reduction. The retardation. Now, if there is a biological block, you have to struggle through the block. If biologically the nervous system, brain and other machinery are reasonably okay in the current human evolution, then that retardation potential is overcome by the force of inner push and the exercise which draws out, organizes and fixes the capacity in its working in the surface layers of the embodied mind. Surface mind, surface consciousness, surface personality. These are the words we use in the layer that's organized in the physical. But where did it come from? It came from the inner domain of mind. Where what happens? In this subliminal, you have either the whole or the greater presence or force of them concealed. Of the mind in this case. So, 3 terms he's giving us. We have to stop and really explore because there's a lot of knowledge when you pause on these and ask why. The whole of it could be concealed. or a greater presence is concealed, or the force of it is concealed. If the whole of it is concealed, then there's very little leaking out. The greater part is concealed, then a lesser part is coming out. This is the condition of most human beings. Our current mental development and the best that you can have today is still a small part of the whole potential of the mental being, mental self, which is held in potential there. If from childhood the whole training was better done, and this is something I keep saying, and it's not an exaggeration, what could easily push the intelligence capacity way beyond what is current. Easily, I say, with a few basic exercises, push 20 points in the IQ. And when I've tried this a few times with a few people, just say, okay, let's train a little, push the limit. The initial enthusiasm is there, and then there's a point where there's a resistance. Oh, this was fun. It got to a point to push more, I have to make more effort, and there's a kind of a resistance in the mind, a kind of an inertia. It's not incapacity, it's inertia of wanting to make an effort, and the person says, yes, that was fun, but now move on, do something else. You call the person back, come on, let's push it a little more. Yes, it requires you to push as if the limits of your resistance in the physical mind. But even when you're doing that, the faculty itself is there, and it's just pushing through resistant material. The faculty is not being created. By pushing through the resistant material, the faculty has now extended and gripped the material and can now wield it more and more. And you do find adults at late age. Only today I met somebody who said, I'm going to join a university for adults and start learning what psychology or maybe mathematics or whatever. This is a lady. And this is because there is enough interest in the mind consciousness, and it's a developed, intelligent mind, that it does not mind this resistance, it enjoys overcoming this resistance. Who is enjoying? This mental person behind, subliminal, wants to. And behind that is the soul, you, the person incarnate truly, who says, this I want to complete. It was quite a remarkable meeting just a while back where I had with a lady. I said she wanted to enter mathematics. Instead, she was taken into, I suppose by external pressure, wrong guidance, she said, to become into finance. Still mathematics is her love. And then she said she got into programming, which was the most interesting, and that was her real love. Why? Who chose this? Soul's choice. In soul's choice, it drew forward on the potential of the mind and the mind capacities which are inherent in all of us. In this, Sri Aurobindo has used the vocabulary, the mental soul or the mental Purusha. And from there this. So he has to bring forward, okay, we're coming now to the text again. So either the whole or the greater presence or the force of them is concealed in his subliminal or latent and unformulated in his superconscious parts. So in the subliminal it is concealed. In the superconscious layers, remember we have the supramental also, the supramental Purusha and the Sachidananda Purusha. These also exist. They are part of us. But what's missing? Unformulated in the superconscious parts. So if you try to go into those domains, you fall as if asleep or into a state of trance. Or you can get into them, but there's no link from there to here, and so you have no way to get back into them if someone pulled you into it. So this is one of the things which can happen, and this is the help we receive all the time from the Divine Mother, from the Divine Grace. If there's a capacity and a potential within you, every now and then you will have this, when you're open and receptive with aspiration, she will pull you into that. But there's no link between where you are and that. So you're pulled, you're in this state, oh wow, what a wonderful exalted state. You're dropped, you fall, maybe in a few days, you come back, oh, I have the memory, and after 2 or 3 days, I don't even have the memory, I have only the memory that it felt so good, but I can't remember what it felt like. Or maybe you do remember, but vaguely now. but there's no continuity, so you can't go back into it. Remember, this is the description Sri Aurobindo had about 2 paragraphs before, where he says, even in the out-of-body state, when you have shed your physical body, if you're pulled into a higher domain, and you could be by grace, you fall back, you don't have the ability to come back to that domain because the linking states are not built. Where do you build the linking states? During your incarnation. You build that here, and then out-of-body state, you'll be able to move into those domains. So, in those higher parts, unformulated in his superconscient parts. That's why we call them superconscient. When they are more formulated, they become conscious to us in higher and higher ranges of, and the names Sri Aurobindo gives are higher mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, overmental and supramental, and then gradations even there, and so on. The vocabulary is not important. The fact is there is a continuum that can be built up, for which the essence is already there in the Purusha of the mind, supermind, or the Sachidananda voice. Supreme spiritual being is what he calls that. So I reread that line, and either the whole or the greater presence or the force of them is concealed in his subliminal, or latent and unformulated in his superconscient parts. So what we are doing in our evolution is only bringing forward what is already there in the principle and in the potential capacities. So what happens now in this bringing forward? He explains. He has to bring forward their powers in his active consciousness and to awake to them in his knowledge, in its knowledge, in the knowledge of the active consciousness. So again, this is one of those amazing articulations. If you understand this, you get the whole essence of the evolutionary process, and you can enormously accelerate it by various means. So he has to bring forward their powers. The powers are already there. Let's stay with the mind for the moment. So the mind self is within you. You want to bring forward its powers in his active consciousness. This is this part, this fellow on the surface, embodied person thinking, I want to increase my mind capacities. It's behind the veil, and I have to bring it forward. And to awake to them in its knowledge, in the knowledge of his active consciousness, you have to awake to them. You understand what that means? In your current mind awareness, become conscious of this thing which is there as a latent potential. You awaken to that potential in you, to that power, to that faculty in you. And you bring forward that thing. So there are two different things. The bringing forward, and he puts that first, the bringing forward when it happens, and it may happen occasionally by grace or by the push of the soul or by help from external influence, whichever, is brought forward. Suddenly you say, oh wow, this is such a wonderful state or capacity or potential in me. Then it fades out. But if in the outer part you awaken to the fact that it is there somewhere inside me and I felt it come forward and I felt it withdraw, from here now you reach back and, so to say, draw it out again. This principle, this process is so common, so essential to all levels of development, including, and I'm going to sidetrack a bit, including the emergence of the psychic influence in you. It may happen occasionally that the psychic influence comes strongly to the front and wow, everything is so beautiful, the world is so beautiful, and all those beautiful experiences you have, and then it withdraws. What do you do in the surface part where you no more feel it? Do you say, oh, it was so nice, I wish I could get it back, but I don't know how? Or do you catch that moment and try to feel again and again, reconnect with that influence, and still it's an influence, you don't have the whole thing, but just the influence of it. Reconnect, remember again and again every day until the memory of it, and with it the link to it, is now permanently with you. What do you do instead? Oh, I had such a beautiful birthday, it was so nice, I felt that, and now I'm lost. A week, 2 weeks has passed, and then, oh, what was it? Did I even remember? No, I'm not sure. Maybe I imagined it. It's gone. If the very same day, and the very next day, and the day after you remember, give yourself the time to recall, remember, and draw out its influence. The influence of the influence, even if you need to, but that's the influence still. Draw it out again till the familiarity settles, and then you will have access to it. And by that first influence, you will have subsequently a greater influence, and a greater and a greater. So, I'm going to reread this sentence. He has to bring forward their powers in his active consciousness and to awake to them in its knowledge, in the knowledge of the active consciousness. Why is he using in? Why doesn't it in his knowledge? Why does it say in its knowledge? Because in the knowledge of the outer, in your consciousness, you already have it. In that substance, you don't have it. So you have to bring it in this knowledge of the outer. But each of these powers, so again, the he, you can actually say is the soul bringing forward and then awakening to it in its surface parts consciousness. You understand? Who brings forward? He has to. He is who. Well, often it's the soul pushes forward because the outer nature isn't capable of getting to it. But it can happen by grace, by external help. So this is what used to happen in the intensified sadhana process in the early days of the ashram. You remember every day people would go to the mother or Sri Aurobindo. In the early days, even Sri Aurobindo, before he withdrew from the active contact, physical contact, but kept the other level of contact. So you went to the mother, or before that Sri Aurobindo also, and she would look at you and transmit, or she would physically place her hand and transmit and infuse substance and the experience itself, and the power and the faculty and the capacity. Or draw from within, just pull this out into the person, infuse and imprint. And you were in this state of consciousness, lifted, awakened, widened, shifted. All that was behind this in the subliminal or in the higher ranges, brought forward, infused, awakened. What do you do after that? And you went to work with the effort to continue this state and extend it and integrate it into the physical activity in the and through the work itself. That was the mechanism for the most rapid evolution of the human consciousness. The later sadhakas didn't have this. Many of them were not sadhakas, they were mostly just devotees. So they got this blessing because it was available to anybody who came. You got this and then you lost it by the time you went to work. Oh, it felt so nice. Oh. Or at best what remains is an automatic afterglow. You made no effort to continue or integrate it. It happened in many cases, even despite your effort, but it took a little longer. But those who made the effort, and this was the condition of the initial group of sadhakas, they had enormous rapid progress. This is the essence of evolution. The drawing forward of that which is in this way latent already within you, with full capacity of the entirety of this mind Purusha, waiting, and the bulk is still hidden, remember. So all that comes forward and gets organized, infused into the outer substance, which is now able to familiarly recall, draw upon it, and organize it more and more. So what are all the things you have to do? The greater presence, the whole presence, or the greater presence, or the force of the presence has to be brought forward and formulated, from its latency brought out into activity. And that's the essence of evolution. Evolution is driven by that thing which is already present behind the scenes, behind the curtain, which comes forward and organizes in the physical, material, outer nature, form, life, individual. That's the true driver of evolution. Sri Aurobindo has other very interesting descriptions of this process in other parts in the Life Divine, where he discusses how even when an animal experiences a struggle, some unusual shift, unusual change in environment, it doesn't know what to do, doesn't know how to adapt. It is from inside that the nudge comes, pushing in a direction. And again, through the repeated nudges, it forms a groove, and the groove becomes now the instinct of the animal, and then eventually an instinct in the species. That's how the species evolution takes place, and even the individual in the species evolves. By the push of the soul, nudging repeatedly on a single point. Look back at the billions of years of slow physical evolution, how much struggle has been to form and shape the behavior of each of these animal types. The instinct of the lion, for example, to eat the rabbit or the deer, or to leap, to hide, all those things have been slowly built up, so to say. or in many cases infused in one go in the beginning, and then from there slowly built up to develop into more and more sophisticated forms. Still, it is from the inner that all this happens, and the true driver of evolution is the inside out. The outside receptivity makes a difference. Why am I spending more time in this? Because if you understand this process, you can actively participate and accelerate and use the help of the inner and the higher both, or even from an external environment. You go, for example, to the physical samadhi, you place your head on it, there's a substance which is being soaked in. Are you conscious? Can you hold it? Can you retain it? Can you build and amplify and intensify it? If you do, then you have this benefit. So, you can also call upon the help directly from above, and the substance can be infused directly by the Divine Mother's grace, even without the physical hand touching directly, as even Sri Aurobindo and the Mother used to do sometimes, even at a distance. So, he has to bring forward their powers in his active consciousness. Active consciousness is this, not in the passive sleeping or inner subliminal, in the active surface. And to awake to them in its knowledge. But each of these powers of his being is in relation with its own proper plane of existence, and all have their roots there. Now comes another mind-blowing insight. Whatever is within you as your potential, let's again stay with the mind, bring it forward. All these powers are really individualized portions of what is existent in the cosmic scale. In their planes. All have their roots there. From there, they are as if individualized here. So here we come to enormous implications. First, you understand logically. This self, the mental, let's say, mental self or the mental Purusha, has its cosmic poise of mental Purusha, of which your experiences of the individual reflection, so to say. All capacities which exist in the cosmic are also reflected or included in this. But where's the root of it? The root is in the original cosmic stance of this mind Purusha. Its reflection in you is as if a specialized aspect, incarnation, potential, unique, distinctive to you as a subset perhaps. But if you know that its roots are there in that, then of course you realize that you are not limited even to those tendencies. You have the potential to draw on full range, full spectrum of that scope. You experience here a first glimpse of the infinite potential that is existent to each individual, even though the individual has its distinctive, unique line of development. The potential you can unfold in that distinctive line of development is still infinite. And it makes sense logically now. You can sense it intuitively, what is described. But each of these powers of his being is in relation with its own proper plane of existence, and all have their roots there. And there's a relationship. This has two other implications. First, that you can draw upon that, so grow as much as you want. But the other is, through this power, therefore, you can as if perceive and act upon, and through that, in the world, or receive the influences from the world in that quality, in your individual part. Both the action and the perception are possible. So let's take again a very material example with the mind still. Your mind's ability to conceptualize, visualize, conceive something, picture something. It's happening here in your individual consciousness. But if you tune in and tap into this larger possibility of the imagination, you glimpse what is being imagined, so to say, by the divine creative consciousness. Or you can put out a formation of the mind which is imprinted in the collective or even the universal or cosmic consciousness. And it impacts, influences circumstances. And he explains, it is through them that there takes place the subliminal resort of the being to the shaping influences from above, a resort which may become more and more conscious as we develop. So it is through these planes of existence where the roots are there. It is through them that takes place the subliminal resort of the being to the shaping influences from above. Behind, within, in the subliminal domain, it's as if we are opening out to the full potential in the plane and the whole cosmic domain. Your individuality, so to say, opens out into universality on each of these levels, in each of these powers of consciousness. And as you develop, you may be able to draw upon that more and more. Draw upon that knowledge or capacity from there. Again, I will take a couple of examples of implication. You will have seen in this movie, which was called what was that? No, the name misses me. So where you have this I want to just double check that is the feed live. Are you getting messages? The last I see is a message saying what's going on. Okay, yes, all fine, thanks. It's in the movie where you have these human beings in a computer and the whole world is a simulation that they're dreaming. And so once they're conscious, they're able to, so to say, plug into the master computer while you're living a simulated life in the movie. You can download a capacity. So in the movie, Neo is the hero. He calls up the master control computer facility and says, give me the capacity to fly a helicopter. And the capacity is downloaded, and then he can take up a helicopter, and as if all the instincts of how to operate this are embedded. This is actually possible. In fact, is the method used by more advanced civilizations in other planets to infuse capacities in you, using technologies. But the same thing can be done more directly by a spiritual opening to a higher universal consciousness. Generally need not be of a higher level, but on that level, universal consciousness where you can draw a facility, a capacity, and embed it. You may still have to go back and forth a few times to fine tune because the physical body is still quite resistant. But when it gets embedded, literally you feel as if, oh, it's familiar. In the body, I feel my capacity to do this. You can get into the helicopter and fly, and you'll have all the right reflexes and tendencies. Your physical memory will be surprised. How am I doing this? But I'm doing it. If it interferes, it can mess it up. But if it allows itself to be carried, it will happen. And you can draw literally from the universal consciousness, different capacities or specific knowledge. It's not the higher intuition. The same thing can be acquired also through an intuitive process, which would be superior, but still, you can draw this. So this is one example I want to give of how a capacity could be drawn. You could do this indirectly by dwelling on somebody. You look at a person who has this capacity and you say, wow, how is he doing? You identify with the way he is doing and feel him, so to say, and absorb something of that consciousness imprint, and then you find you can do it more easily as if. I've spoken of this particular method, which is the basic method of transmission of capacities in any teacher-student relationship, but you can actually turn to anybody and treat them as teacher and so to say draw from their example, and because it's in your consciousness, in the universal opening, in your subliminal. You can also as if call out for help from the larger forces, and this becomes now the basis for certain kinds of knowledge acquired through occult means, where an entity could, so to say, imprint a certain consciousness. I would not speak of lower entities, but generally speaking, this was the approach in the Vedic yoga. where you consciously opened to the Vedic deities as cosmic divine beings, who then infused into you their consciousness, with it their capacity and their potential. And just like that, you find yourself expressing their power or their consciousness more and more. To the extent it is infused and embedded in the physical consciousness, you have evolved. So in the Veda, there is this very interesting idea that our evolution is their incarnation, so to say, or as we grow, they in us grow with us. Interesting. They're just two different ways of looking at the same idea. So the Vedic approach itself was built on this, that you invoked the deities, you opened yourself to the Vedic deities and their functions in you. So you had to understand what their functions were. And then with the verses you invoked by prayer, there were two verses. First is an invocation, and the second one is the affirmation, which having received now fixates, infuses, and makes permanent in you. Otherwise you receive, oh, it feels nice, shoop, you come back, the thing is gone and evaporates. So there are two movements. One is receiving, and then the second, insisting, affirming, infusing, until in the physical substance itself, now that capacity, consciousness, power, skill, tendency, faculty is now yours. You have evolved. Or they have now grown in you. So there is this mutuality of concept in the Vedic evolution, Vedic spiritual practice, that we help each other. As we open and they infuse in us, they grow with us. It's an interesting idea. So I think that gives us enough understanding of this. Yeah, the movie which I was referring to is The Matrix. I'm sorry, it slipped out of my memory. So The Matrix, for those of you who might like to, just, it's worth watching if you have not seen it. So now we're continuing with the text. But each of these powers of his being is in relation with its own proper plane of existence, and all have their roots there. It is through them that there takes place the subliminal resort of the being to the shaping influences from above, a resort which may become more and more conscious as we develop. So the more our growth of consciousness, the more we can actually draw upon this. It is logical then that according to the development of their powers in our conscious evolution should be the internatal resort which this nature of our birth here and its evolutionary object and process necessitate. Logically, if you have grown much more in this growth of their powers in your evolution, in the internatal, between two lives, the nature of your birth and evolutionary object and process also would be different that you resort to. Obviously, if you have developed more, you would want to express more. If you felt in you the potential to take much more, you would want to develop that much more. And therefore, in that state also, you would reach out as if to draw upon that potential and choose to infuse that more and more. So the internatal process would resort to these processes, these means, and bring these objects into the intention for the birth. So, with this nature of our birth here and its evolutionary objectives and process would necessitate this internatal resort. So the preparation also for the new personality that you will take and the lines of possibilities you want to push forward in the new incarnation, all of that would be prepared in that internatal phase with this purpose. You understand what he is getting to. And perhaps the duration of that internatal also would need to be longer if you had to draw in a greater preparation. The circumstances and the stages of that resort must be complex and not of the crudely and trenchantly simple character which the popular religions imagine. But in itself, it can be accepted as an inevitable consequence of the very origin and nature of the soul life in the body. So how complex is that? You can imagine all the different nuances you would have want to draw upon, and the way the preparation would be. And you can see also there it is in that point that some of the individual aspirations would align with certain cosmic deities. And so the deities might say, here's a soul aligning to this purpose, and we will infuse, we will join, support this evolutionary line. And that's how they join and participate from that point. You see how complex this can become potentially. Because in reality, all the faculties, all these powers are those cosmic deities. You're already, so to say, plugged into a combination of their influences in you. But then some of them will say, yes, this one is sufficiently evolved or pushing in this direction, we will also participate. And this is where you see the basis of the Vibhuti process of infusing and amplifying the human potential. In the integral yoga, we do not specifically aim at the Vedic deities also. We aim at all these being essentially powers and aspects of the one Divine Mother. And by opening ourselves to her entirely, the full potential of her working, which is a complex blend of all these possibilities, can act in us freely, directly. One of the key steps of the integral yoga is the amplification of all these powers in us, in all the parts of our being, in our nature and in the soul powers. So there are two things. From the soul aspiration, the four powers have to be amplified, and then their embedding, their organization in our outer nature also has to be enormously amplified. So all this is part of objects of the integral yoga and done by this direct process of opening to the Divine Mother's Shakti, her energy, and in her four aspects particularly working in you. So you could do it in a general way, opening to her and allowing it to work, or actually recognize the four aspects and recognize, this is the aspect operating much more in me, my nature more aligned to this, and choose to consciously open to that and let that work and grow in you more easily, if that is easier for you to start. All is a closely woven web, an evolution and an interaction whose links have been forged by a conscious force, capital C, capital F, following out the truth of its own motives according to a dynamic logic of these finite workings of the infinite. Mind-blowing statement because it opens you out fully now to the big, massive working. You have a close woven web. Everything is interconnected with everything else. All these faculties and powers working through us, in us, behind the veil, coming out through the veil, across lives, and the soul's choice of bringing, infusing, bringing forward certain capacities. An evolution and an interaction. There's an interaction, interchange taking place also, outer, inner, as well as in the subliminal with the universe, whose links have been forged by a conscious force, that is the divine conscious Shakti, working out the truth of its own motives according to a dynamic logic of these finite workings of the infinite divine consciousness working through these finites, and the Shakti working, operating, organizing with a dynamic logic. It is not a fixed logic. The logic itself flows according to the circumstances and the opportunities and possibilities. And at every moment it is that which is working out. So in this one sentence you see this big picture, the vision of the real work taking place. In this view of rebirth and the soul's temporary passage into other planes of existence, if this view of rebirth and the soul's temporary passage into other planes of existence is correct, both rebirth and afterlife assume a different significance from the color put on them by the long current belief about reincarnation and the after-death sojourn in worlds beyond us. So once you get this, Aurobindo has to argue out. So he says, if this is correct, then you have to question all those beliefs. But this he got to by going through, again, a very clear logic. But in a very gentle, polite way, he's telling you that all those long current beliefs are mostly wrong. Or they catch partial truths and warp much of it. Something else which is even more essential here to recognize. The purpose of rebirth and the afterlife now we're seeing in a totally different way. And you can see how different this is from anything which you find in existing religions and philosophies, but it's deeply satisfying, logical also, and matches the experience of anybody who has memory of the passage or has seen things while in an out-of-body state. But very interesting shift he has also said in the way he articulates this sentence. He says, the soul's temporary passage into other planes of existence. Most of the religions are speaking of the soul's temporary passage in the physical plane of existence, in birth, in incarnation. Sri Aurobindo's turned it completely around. It's the passage between lives which is temporary. It's the return to the physical life which is the more permanent truth. Think about this, the way he articulates it. And these are sometimes such subtle but so powerful in their impact. This view of rebirth and the soul's temporary passage into other worlds of existence is correct. Then both rebirth and afterlife assume a different significance. Significance and color put upon them. You have color is shades and nuances over the significances. And then he goes into this whole idea of reincarnation having a moral aspect or a metaphysical aspect of justice, ethics, etc. And from there goes into this whole idea of why you're compelled to return because you're caught in the wheel of time, birth, and then it is enlightened and liberated, and all those ideas. I'm not going to go into them. For those of you who want to, it is worth reading to understand. He also then develops aspects of the role of karma and so on, which we have already covered before, right at the beginning of this particular series of the discussion. So I don't repeat. But there were two particular questions which I want to touch. The first question was from Rajan, who raised this issue about the place of suicide. He says, I have a question regarding the suicide part of the discussion, which was last time of this series. As you said, Sri Aurobindo, the mother and Panditji's advice against suicide. I understand that in most contexts, but what about assisted suicide for terminally ill, long suffering, or very elderly people? Recently, the famous psychologist Daniel Kahneman apparently died at an assisted suicide facility in Switzerland. He was 90 and not known to be suffering from a terminal or extremely painful condition. So his intelligence was fully functional. And there's an interview which then Rajan has sent also in a link. You'll find it on the New York Times. The journal actually asks him to explain his choice. And he says that I'm healthy, I have no other, but I've lived a healthy life, I have no other purpose, so I might as well quit. So that's Rajan's question. And then Rajan asks, there are others in vegetative state, for example, or very old and suffering. Would you say that suicide in whatever form would not be considered, or can there be an exception? So looking at the example of this famous Daniel Kahneman psychologist, I briefly glance through the interview article. There's not much that he says. Basically, he says, I have lived a complete life, so I see no point in continuing. I'm healthy. I have no purpose. This, unfortunately, is the consequence of having lost the link with the psychic and not having a larger framework of what life is for. So from that, you can understand his psychology would be of a very poor, shallow, superficial kind, necessarily. Where you're here by chance, you grow and you understand how your mind works, but there's no fundamental purpose to why you took birth. If he had understood or even remembered that there was a reincarnation, he will come back again. And that he actually came for a purpose, and the purpose is not completed because he can do so much more with a functioning mind and body. If he had recovered that much, or even had something of the psychic influence within him strong enough, he would have said, I can quit, I've had a complete life, but I can do so much more and push this to limit. It is also possible, I'm not ruling it out, that somewhere the purpose of his incarnation was done. There's nothing left. In such a case, the soul itself would have found the necessary means. There would have been a body breakdown, shutdown, and he would have left. But when the body is healthy, from the soul's point of view, hey, I can do so much more. And unless it chooses to leave, one should not have done this, what he did. And if we were present when he was kicked out of the body by the body being shut down, he would have, so to say, woken up eventually to his deeper sense of purpose in the subtle body, and he would have said, hey, that was kind of a stupid personality. I wish I could have continued longer. But okay, I've done my part, let's continue. That's typically what would be the response. There's another response which also is documented by some out-of-body experiences. Watching someone who's just been living his whole life in some kind of a foolish religious belief of purpose of life being whatever the religion had put in the box. He comes out of the body and suddenly the memory, full memory of his incarnation and purpose comes back, and the reality of what he's here for, from where he looks at the whole life wasted in that religious belief and shakes his head and says, what a waste, and moves on. This is the reality outside the little box that we live in. So I would say even in Kahneman's case, no, don't think it is justified. I've actually seen a case of this. Was a person who was a very good friend. He was living in Singapore, he was a businessman, and having retired from his business, he had certain objectives, one of which was to translate Sri Aurobindo's works into Chinese. And he completed that. He had 3 things, he told me. This. One of them was translation. And then one day he came to me and he said, Sraddhalu, I have completed all the 3 things which were my life's objectives. What do I do now? Very powerful, booming voice. And in the instant it was obvious what the situation was. So I just said to him, from this point, every day, the one thing you have to do is deepen your immersion in the mother. And 6 months down, he left. But the leaving was the soul's choice, having completed the work. And he would come back in a fresh body with a different priority objective. One does not need assisted suicide for that. It's very clear when the soul decides, it finds its own way to gradually shut down, withdraw the life energies, and the body begins to break down, and it goes. Very simple. On the other hand, if the soul says, no, but I want to complete more, even there's more that's left, it'll infuse more life force if it is capable and conscious enough. It'll infuse more life force and push the body. If the body breaks down, it'll struggle. It'll say, I wish I could, I wish I could. It all depends on its capacity and how much support you get from the body. But in this case, the decision made gradually withdraws, the body shuts down, and he is left. It was a very smooth, peaceful transition. No problem. The other cases of vegetative state, I'm coming back to Rajan's question, people in a vegetative state also, there are 2 types. Those in which the soul has already left and the biology is technically dead, just sustained by a machine with some mechanical life force. Or the soul is actually present and saying, it's interesting, why not just continue as long as I can as an experience, I'm enjoying this, or whatever is happening internally, it is absorbing. There are cases which I've mentioned before, because this kind of question has come before, where after 30 years the person wakes up from the so-called vegetative state with full recall of what happened during the 30 years, sometimes without recall. But it shows that when the soul is present, it may accept that condition, it may work to heal and overcome it, or eventually it just says, okay, now I need to get back to, and comes back. In many cases, this has happened when the medical science declared the body vegetative, and so they said, now we're going to harvest the organs. They were about to start cutting when the fellow wakes up and says, hey, stop. So it shows you that there was a choice to stay, and it needed the shock to make the soul assert itself and say, hey, no, I want to continue, stop this. So, and then there are actual cases where the soul has already left. But how do you distinguish? It needs a deeper sight. So, I don't have a simple answer there, but still, mostly I would say, since we can't make out, don't do anything. Unless there's a financial issue. So, you say the body in a vegetative state, we can't sustain, it's too expensive, well, you do what you can. But if you have an insight, then you would try to draw the person out also, which is also possible. Or very old and suffering people, again the question would be, if the soul had decided to leave, then it would find its way. So very old or suffering is still not good enough as a reason for assisted suicide. So generally I would say suicide in whatever form should not be accepted. There are no exceptions. From a spiritual point of view, purely. Then there are all kinds of other interests. We don't get into those. There is another question which comes from Plumeria. It is in the comments of the last video, where he says that the explanation at 22 minutes of evenings 2:39, does that mean that the traditional view of karma is somewhat correct? That things which happen to us is based on our past, and we cannot see in the totality of time the various lifetimes because of our limited vision, and so we don't register the ignorance and thus feel the punishment at present, etc. I'm not reading the full question. No, it's not correct. And we have discussed this in some detail in the earlier portions of this particular theme of continuing consciousness across lives from the same chapter. And in the lines which I am now currently skipping, we had actually looked at Sri Aurobindo's discussion of the law of karma. And yes, there is such a thing, but it is a law operating at a level, and there are other laws operating at other levels, and ultimately it is always the freedom of the soul, freedom of the self, freedom of the divine consciousness and its grace to override every such law. So yes, there is such a thing as karma, and it's simply the nature of the interdependence of processes. But Sri Aurobindo insists that it is not mechanical, and in fact it is quite a plastic process and very complex, and a lot of things are happening, including the fact that a karma created at a certain grade of consciousness is only operating as long as you are in that grade. You move to a higher level, it ceases to affect you, and as a force which was put out, it tends to dissipate. And the divine will is not a mechanical will. The divine will operates through even karmic processes. So what might seem like karma from a certain perspective might also look at an action, seem like an action of the divine grace working, because it used a certain channel available of the karmic energy force and used it to direct for an outcome which is quite different from what the karma might have done by itself. So there's a lot of flexibility and freedom. Finally, the nature of karma itself, if you see as a force, all force being essentially limited, reflected, distorted workings of the one force, which is the divine cosmic force, conscious force, the Divine Mother can reshape even a karma from a negative into a positive outcome, or erase instantly, freely, because the freedom of the self is all that matters. Karma itself is a secondary process of tendencies, of momentum, of forces. So from a spiritual point of view, one need not obsess too much with karma, and it's better not to think about it too much. Quite unlike the Buddhist teaching, where there is no soul and no God. Then what's left is only machinery. And there karma becomes this massive machinery, compulsion, you're trapped in it, you are a prisoner in its functioning, and it tends to get more and more mechanical and mathematically reductionist, depending on traditions and lineages. But when you look at the big picture from a spiritual point of view, it's just one of many processes and forces. Freedom of soul, freedom of the divine consciousness is the overarching primary principle. So Sri Aurobindo, now I'm skipping several paragraphs because we've already covered them, and they were key ideas with which we started, where he says that it's not about reward and punishment that makes us reincarnate. The reincarnation itself is a choice. And what happens at a very advanced stage of evolution is this gathering of different personalities which are built up, from which the whole growth takes place with different variations in the personality, the person being the same. So we come now to a very important idea, and this is the distinction made between the person and the personality. The person who incarnates puts out a personality, and the personality is a temporary mental, vital, physical formation of the real person, the psychic being. So I'm going to read this paragraph briefly, and it's something we will elaborate upon the next time. So he says, personality is only a temporary mental, vital, physical formation which the being, the real person, the psychic entity, puts forward on the surface. It is not the self in its abiding reality. In each return to earth, the person, the Purusha, makes a new formation, builds a new personal quantum suitable for a new experience, for a new growth of its being. When it passes from its body, it keeps still the same vital mental form for a time. But the forms or sheets dissolve, and what is kept is only the essential elements of the past quantum, of which some will but some may not be used in the next incarnation. So some will be used, some may not be used, and it keeps only what is relevant. The essential form of the past personality may remain as one element among many, one personality among many personalities of the same person. But in the background, in the subliminal, behind the veil of the surface mind, life and body, contributing from there whatever is needed of itself to the new formation. But it will not itself be the whole formation or build anew the old unchanged type of nature. So it's not as if once that personality is there, you're going to draw it back. It's there as an influence, as an imprint from that life and the personality used then. And yes, these things do come, but as a mix, they can be very complex. Because, well, let's say you have had at least a few hundred lives before with very different personalities. So it's as if you have a crowd of at least 100 different personality facets which are there. So it's not even as if they have an individual thing. It's more as if the influence relevant for this lifetime has been as if brought forward, infused to form the current personality, and the current personality has a blend of all these tendencies already developed as capacities in the past, and now pushing forward with a different focus. It may even be that the new quantum or structure of being will exhibit a quite contrary character and temperament, quite other capacities, other very different tendencies. For latent potentials may be ready to emerge, or something already in action but inchoate may have been held back in the last life which needed to be worked out, but was kept over for a later and more suitable combination of the possibilities of the nature. So you see, there are elements which you say, oh, this was partly developed, but I can't develop in this lifetime because the priorities here are different. So I'm going to keep this for later development, and it is brought back to the forefront at some other lifetime where you have a priority which aligns to this. And until then, this remains as an unformed, half-developed tendency, not well integrated, and then brought forward for integration in a totally different lifetime. So a lot of latent potentials like this may be brought forward. And now connect this to the earlier discussion of the nature of evolution as a bringing forward of something which is already held within us as a potential. All the past is indeed there, with its accelerated impetus and potentialities for the formation of the future. But all of it is not ostensibly present and active. So this is the key thing when the soul is in this, what I described earlier as a transmutation process of metamorphosis. You withdraw certain elements, you push forward certain elements as relevant and push forward a different personality, and then that is infused, imprinted in the outer physical nature with that translation process which we discussed earlier. The greater the variety of formations that have existed in the past and can be utilized, the more rich and multitudinous the accumulated buildings of experience. The more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new birth. So here is the scope of this whole process. Over lives, the more you have built, the more rich, the more variety that you have been able to build, the more you have available for the new experiences, isn't it? So in some cases, the soul may take a very monotone, slow pursuit. Little bit here, little bit there, and slow over time. You've built up a certain capacity, but it's very in its scope. Another soul may take very different ranges and push often contradictory capacities and possibilities. And then it has built up, perhaps in the same time, with the same number of lives approximately, it has built up a much more rich potential. Now when it incarnates, it can draw upon all these different tendencies, and each is a different line of growth, so each soul has its own kind of journey. And there are those who go for very rich development, there are those who go for very slow, not so wide potential, and often this is associated with the maturity of the soul's evolution also. But he says the more you have this, the more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, capacity for power, capacity for action, for character, and this very interesting phrasing he uses, manifold response to the universe that can be brought forward. So it's almost as if when you incarnate, you're entering into this world, this universe as your big playfield, and you are like a child in this playfield. And the universe is throwing at you challenges, questions, possibilities, opportunities. What's the response you will give? And the richer you have built up, the richer the response that you can bring forward. It's a very interesting wording. The more manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new births. So here again, brought forward and harmonized. These are two different things. You can bring forward many tendencies and they could all be in conflict with each other. My intelligence is contrary to my passion, which is contrary to my artistic call, and they are not blended. The integration is also a challenge and has to be worked upon. So you'll find in many lives, I've mentioned this before many times, but it's useful to repeat here. In many lives, you're developing a side, and another life you're developing another side, and then there are lives reserved for integration of these sides. And it is my general, let's say, perception that the present phase is one of the most opportune for integration, because everything in nature is working towards integration. Knowledge, capacities, powers, skills, everything. And so for many of us, this is a lifetime where things developed in specializations in the past are brought forward for purpose of integration. And if you see in yourself many tendencies which are too dispersed, not sufficiently integrated, well, understand this is one of the things you're supposed to work on. And so you can actively participate in that process. So the harmonization in the new birth. The more numerous the veiled personalities, mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface, the greater and more opulent will be that personality. This is so important. We'll reread this. The veiled personalities of all the past work done, built up, and they are veiled behind. The more numerous the veiled personalities, and they can be mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface, the greater and more opulent will be that personality, and the nearer to the possible transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. It's almost as if approaching the transition out of mental stage to the, let's call it supramental, with whatever intermediate steps. The more close you come to, the more you need the full enrichment of all these different personalities and brought forward now to be able to make that breakthrough. The greater and more opulent, wealthy, rich, you have so much that you can bring forward to bring into manifestation, so much you can draw upon to overcome, to master your circumstances, to lift your possibilities to their highest. Transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution. We are on the brink of that. If we have reached that point, we have completed this to something beyond it. So I would hope that for most of us, we can say we are approaching this point of completed mental stage. It's not the case. For many, there has not been sufficient integration in this, particularly with the peak of rational and mental development that the present age represents. Many of us have not made that effort. Make it now, do it now, develop your capacities, even including the mental capacities, as much as you can, to push to be able to make this leap. Such a complexity and gathering up of many personalities in one person can be a sign of a very advanced stage of the individual's evolution, when there is a strong central being that holds all together and works towards harmonization and integration of the many-sided movement of the nature. Can be a sign, doesn't mean always. But certainly if it is, then in this very advanced stage of evolution, you still need the strong central being which will hold it all together and work to harmonize and integrate all this many-sided movement. Dwell on this idea. A strong inner focus that holds it all together. Otherwise, you tend to be pulled in disparate tendencies. So you see now, if you look back at your phase of education, it's something which I will insist. If you're young still, it doesn't matter what your age, if you're young biologically and mentally, push all the facets of your capacities. Don't stay stuck in a kind of an inertia of that which is easy for you. Learn to play instruments, write poetry, sing, do some challenging activities where you have to overcome your fears. And basically, if you look at the spectrum of possibilities and the fourfold character of the soul aspirations, push the boundaries a little bit in each of the possibilities and directions. Don't do it because, as we are taught in our education or in a family, you have to excel, you have to be superior to others. No, it's just to bring forward a certain capacity and push the boundary, push in its expression in the surface nature. Even if that's not the priority in this life's temperament, push, draw upon the full richness of possibilities that have been worked upon. You'll feel your way, but play with this, push as much as you can. Give yourself the time for these things. And if nothing else, do the things which give you deep satisfaction, even if briefly, even if once in a week, once in a month. Do those variety of things. Try to enrich your life as much as you can. And you will notice when you do this that there is a focal point of the central aspiration which will become more and more evident, which will become more and more visible to your own awareness. And this is the strong central being that holds together everything, harmonizes and integrates the whole many-sided movement of the nature. But you have to really work on this if you want to make the most of this opportunity of this lifetime. And today, because of technology, all this is becoming very easy. You don't need to spend an entire life to dedicate it to become a musician. You've done that before. Draw upon that now and just play with the music, have fun, enjoy. And you can do that with very little equipment. You don't have to buy expensive things. Play with your existing tablet or computer keyboard, or just sing your heart freely and let that musicality of your potential inner, developed in the past, just flow out in the joy of that expression, and so on. But then he says, but this opulent taking up of the past would not be a repetition of personality. It would be a new formation and large consummation. It is not as a machinery for the persistent renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality that rebirth exists, but as a means for the evolution of the spiritual being in nature. So we are not here to repeat mechanically the same thing. We want to have the full evolution of the spiritual being, that's you in your origin, in nature, that's in this movement of the manifestation. So at this point we have come to something very important. You're seeing the big picture through all these different facets of personality. You're seeing how all this potential is being brought forward through from behind the veil into the surface part and organized, which is the whole emergent evolution. You've seen the mechanism of this coming forward and how you can participate to amplify it. And how across lives all these different facets are also present, and they're all there as if influencing to make a potentially very rich expression here, on the brink of a breakthrough beyond the human mental evolution to something still higher. At this point, we come to a very important question. With a strong individuality holding it all together, this whole richness. Since the goal is not mere repetition of the same personality, do we still need to forget it all each time we incarnate? And have to start again even in our memory. I don't remember, but I feel my life has a purpose. I don't know what it is, and then I go through all the confusion. Why not this maturity now built up with whatever partial integration available? Why not continue this into the next incarnation? The soul might have this as an intention, but that intention may not be enough. It needs 3 conditions to be fulfilled to be able to carry through without being bound in a very narrow personality again, allowing for this full flexibility of a changing, widening personality of a new formation each time, without losing the memory and the continuity of consciousness. And this is the question which is our focus now, for which this particular theme we had taken up. And this question now we will take up for the next session's discussion. First, is it possible? Yes, Sri Aurobindo says it's possible. And what are the three conditions to be fulfilled for being able to make this transition? And again, I'm bringing it to the context of us as we are today, assuming that for all of us, it's one of those very important lives where so much of our potential has been brought forward, and we are moving to this conscious participation from the mind to a new stage of evolution. We don't want to lose it all and start afresh. It will be essential for us to consciously build up this capacity to carry over our, let's say, core of consciousness. You don't have to carry all the details. The core of your consciousness, of your purpose, and the work done in this lifetime into the next. And it can be done. The method is shown to you, and we have to make this effort. It's essential for all of us to do this. If you're very young, it may not be on your priority. But if you are at any point of age where you've crossed the halfway threshold of life, typical lifespan, you will begin to feel this as very important, because you realize one human lifetime is not enough for the work to be done. We want to be able to continue without losing so much time. Typically, a person spends the first 20 years completely lost, still just coming into your own. The next 20 years trying to find your deeper sense of purpose. And the next 20 years, having found it, trying to undo the damage done by the past education and all the wrong habits infused into you. And you wish you could have had this knowledge right at the beginning. And then the last 20 years, your biology is not keeping up with you, and you have to struggle with the resistance of inertia and other issues. So if you look at it that way, the actual time given to you is very little. If this memory could be carried over into the next, then right from the beginning you could as if continue and work on it with the full capacity. So, but this part, the capacity to carry over, you have to develop. And for that, what are the requirements? This will be our discussion next time. I'll just look at the chat box for any immediate questions to take up. Vivek Pavitra is asking, just wondering why mother spent so much time with Satprem. Apparently he had committed suicide multiple times in past lives. Yes, so there were two aspects to this work that she did. Satprem, remember, was one of those exceptional beings who also represented an alignment to one of the beings that was, I'm going to use this word because it's the mother herself who had pointed this out. She had explained to him that in his prior incarnations he was Anubis who took people across at the end of their life. Meaning that he was an emanation or aligned with an emanation of the Lord of Death. And so to the part of that consciousness that she wanted turned to the divine, he was the vehicle for that turning. And since there was this tendency already within him from past lives of committing suicide, and he was facing severe trauma of suicide impulses in this life, she made him promise that he would go through till the end and not cut short. What is moving in this narrative is about a month before he left his body, he called up a very close friend and said to him, I kept my promise, I've gone through till the end. So it's a huge achievement from a human perspective, from evolutionary perspective, because two things were done. That cycle was broken, but also the turning of allegiance of that emanation, which was represented something of the emanation of the God of Death, that was turned to fulfilling and serving the divine. It's a huge achievement in cosmic terms because of the shift it makes across the world, across the universe. We have very little understanding of how these things work, and many of the things which the mother did was to turn these beings who represented emanations of the various Asuric forces to turn their allegiance to the Divine Mother, or to the divine, and or to lose themselves in the divine. This shift is huge. It has massive implications, of the results of which you will see in the centuries that follow. So what was achieved just with that one turning, and from that you can understand why she put so much time and energy in helping him. So Vivek again asks, the problem is the time where making a living takes 7 days a week and you don't have time for your home life. I'm going to put this in a broader context. There are two aspects to it. One is the general human condition where we have allowed ourselves to be enslaved by a machinery of society which is more and more sucking the life out of us. In his little book, The Yoga and Its Objects, Aurobindo describes this condition of humanity as death that is life. You're basically living zombies. You're living a dead life. And there's a collective aspect to it. And then there's an individual aspect to it. How much effort do you put into making your life more conscious, irrespective of what you have to do? So making it more conscious does not depend on what you do. Let's say you are bound, you are a slave in a machinery in a jail. Suppose you have to do your routine. That entire routine could be done in a more conscious way, in a more consecrated way, and as a vehicle for the growth and amplification of your capacities or your deepening immersion in the Divine Mother, with the Divine Mother or in the Divine Consciousness. The work itself is completely independent of this shift. And from the point we start doing this, it almost does not matter what the work is. So assume that you can't get over your physical condition, start working on this psycho-spiritual change. What will happen then subsequent as that change grows, the physical circumstances will change also. You will find that you will have options, you will have choices where you can reduce that degree of compulsion. And you will be able to find more and more time, but also circumstances which will assist you in living a more free life for this, dedicated to this purpose. I'm going to put it another way. Look at it the other way. If today everybody in humanity was given complete freedom, what would they do with it? The mass of humanity would simply while away their time and literally burn themselves out in chasing very superficial, exhausting activities or desires. See what happens when somebody wins the lottery. In a few years, either they lose all the lottery or they lose all their health and die of some diseases. Why? Because there is no clear, concentrated purpose and no organization of life purpose around that, life activities around that purpose. So it's almost as if we need that slavery to keep us active and give us direction, even if that direction is kind of meaningless, so that we don't waste our life in whiling away in just superficial, instinct-driven waste. So think of it in terms of a fine balance. How much slave driving do you need to not waste your life, at least to come out of inertia into some rajasic tendency? And then from that, how much can you make of your own effort the shift from the rajasic to a sattvic or a higher value-based prioritization? I would suggest, at least all those who find this kind of discussion interesting are ready for that transition. Start making that shift. And don't worry too much about others who are still in the machinery where they need to be kicked in order to not fall down. And if you can make the shift in yourself, it will have a ripple effect, and perhaps even the systems might change. And perhaps from the education itself, eventually children will be brought up with a higher ideal and purpose, so they will not slip into this kind of tendency for degeneration, which is largely the result of a very meaningless education. So where do you start making a change? It will have to be with yourself. And make this change in you, which is accessible to you. The rest will follow in some way or other. And perhaps for the collective shift, it may take still a little time. But you'll have been participating in that shift by making this change in you. So I think with this, I'm going to pause for today. Review this key point that we have now looked at, that there is a huge preparation that has gone into this particular life. And especially for those of us who are drawn to higher spiritual potential and to the integral yoga itself, where you want to amplify all your capacities and turn them to the divine. There's a huge preparation of lifetimes already present subliminally. And to draw upon that, to bring that forward, even that potential more and more, and to activate and amplify your current capacities is part of the objective of the integral yoga. Draw upon this. Make the effort. Don't waste the opportunity. And most of all, if you understand the principle behind that we discussed as distinct from the Vedic yoga, draw upon the amplification of the mother's force working within you. Let that grow in you. Let that fill your intelligence to amplify the intelligence and push its boundaries. Let that fill in your life energies and amplify its capacities. Let that even fill in your physical body and develop its plasticity and capacity to become conscious. Then all the work done in the past would actually have a vehicle to be able to come forward and bloom and blossom to make your life more enriched, more fulfilling, and also a more complete vehicle for the divine possibilities to incarnate. And then how we will carry all this without losing it into the next will be the theme for next time. So let's take a moment to concentrate in this aspiration to make our life fully bloom and mature in its full possibilities, so that all the work done in the past can actually contribute to the potential being developed now.